Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well and welcome to this session on how to implement Sage CRM the 357 way. I'm going to start this session by taking a look at the key reasons why projects fail and also so that we can help identify areas that need to be focused on when we look to increase project success. So this is a source from ESI International Survey. You may have seen this on the previous presentation from David. If we have a look here, you can see that the key reasons as surveyed are poor requirement definitions, inadequate risk management, poor scope definition, communication problems, and lack of qualified resources. You'll notice that the majority of these reasons are due to either the requirements or risk or skill set to actually deliver the project. Now, these reasons can be caused both by the customer and the partner, which is quite often overlooked, and both should take some responsibility to make sure that the project doesn't fail. However, if you watched the previous session on how to avoid being burnt by a CRM project, you'll have learned that potentially a phased approach is a good way of delivering low-cost, rapid CRM implementations that can scale with the customer. In my experience, and I've done quite a few projects now, the most successful projects have either been large projects that have a lot of heavy scoping and very heavily project managed, or small, tightly managed projects and also tightly managed customer expectations that then grow with the customer once they're installed and taken on board. So the former, as you'd imagine, the bigger project should always be scoped before any development work commences, and the project is almost always unique. The process is almost unique to each project. In effect, with the larger projects, they all have their own unique set of requirements, and that should be adhered to within the project scoping and delivery. However, for the smaller projects, these can easily be managed as long as they follow a certain set of rules. So at Cumulus, what we've done is put together a methodology that allows these smaller projects to be implemented as easily as possible for both the customer and for the partner. We call this the 357 plan. So for those of you that have known me for a while, you may have seen us talking about this kind of thing in the past. So if we look at a typical journey of a implementation, just in general at the moment, we look at the core sort of sections and what we would then define as part of the 3, 5, and 7 plan. This is the simplification of implementation by splitting the feature sets of Sage CRM into its 3 core areas: sales, marketing, support. Each area is then given a specific amount of time to implement, either 3 days or 2 days. The aim is to deliver a quick and simple solution to the customer with the minimal amount of customizations and functionality that gives them just enough to get started on their Sage CRM journey. This has the effect of reducing the majority of issues around requirements gathering, whilst also reducing the risk both to the customer and to the partner that's implementing the solution. Furthermore, as the implementation is kept as simple as possible, it doesn't necessarily require an experienced CRM developer with many years' experience. Fairly new qualified consultants can obviously implement using this methodology, and that can help overcome the lack of resource problems that can arise when you're working on multiple projects. So if we look at the typical Sage CRM implementation now, at the core of almost all Sage CRM implementations is the sales requirement. This can be grouped by the entities that support that sales functionality within Sage CRM, primarily leads, companies, and opportunities, although obviously opportunities also have quotes and orders. We therefore group together these core sections of CRM into the first 3 days of the 357 plan, and we always deliver these as part of the project. Obviously with companies, etc., that's always required in a CRM system. Following on from this, the customer sometimes wants to use Sage CRM for marketing or for support services. So the marketing functionality of Sage CRM is delivered via the use of groups, campaigns, and MailChimp predominantly. We are talking about core out-of-the-box functionality. This allows the customer to be able to segment their data and target the contents with either phone call or email-based marketing. And finally, the third area is support. This is delivered normally within Sage CRM via the cases area, and generally would require generally involves customization around the case fields and workflow for the case. These three areas define what's generally called the traditional three pillars of CRM. So what we need to look at is how does the 3-5-7 plan that we use help to implement a simple Sage CRM solution using these three core pillars. It's just worth noting at this point, until we go too much further into this, that the 3-5-7 plan and the timings, the amount of time spent on each of the different areas is really for guidelines based on our previous implementations and can obviously be adjusted within the confines of the days per area, just for a generalized project delivery. So if we traditionally look at sales, the 3-5-7 methodology is designed to help quick implementation of standard CRM solutions. And these generally always start with enabling the customer to be able to manage companies and their relevant sales engagements. If we therefore take a look at the first 3 days of a 3-5-7 implementation, this should involve the core tables of CRM, company and person, but also should involve the other tables required in a sales engagement, such as opportunities, quotes, and orders. And depending on the customer's requirements, leads may also be implemented at this stage within a typical sales involvement. Now, in our experience, the majority of people either use leads quite heavily or they don't really use leads too much. They just have companies of type prospect, for example. So it depends on whether or not the customer, as part of their process, needs to use that or not. So what we then specify within our 3-5-7 plan is when using 3-5-7, changes should generally be restricted to very basic parts of the system, such as field captions, drop-down lists, some additional fields. There is a limited amount that we actually allow as part of the plan, and also quote and order templates. We would suggest that the quote and order templates, however, are actually, if you create a default set of quote and order templates that look relevant to your region. And what I mean by that is in the UK, for example, we may have quote and order templates that look like a Sage 50 UK template or a Sage 200 UK quote, for example, and then provide those to the customer to allow them to do minor modifications onto the templates, such as changing the logo and potentially changing one or two of the fields in that template. However, it's worth noting at this point that one of the most time-consuming areas of Sage CRM to configure, and invariably one of the first areas to be changed by the customer, is workflows. Workflows can consume a lot of time, both in the scoping and implementation, but it also invariably are one of the key areas that once a customer's gone live is changed almost immediately when they realize that there's something different that they want in their workflow process, or they realize they can do more with it. And so one of the key areas that tends to burn people on projects is around workflow design and implementation. So to enable a quick and easy implementation as part of 3-5-7, we specifically state for customers when we use this to do our sales engagements that we do not implement any workflowing on the leads or opportunity sections within Sage CRM. Workflows can obviously be implemented at a later stage. However, if you want a quick and easy for everyone, both you and the customer project, the workflow should really be strictly avoided for the main sales entities. If a customer does specifically require workflows, and there's a definite need for things to be workflowed, then specifically in the first phase, then really the 3-5-7 plan is not for you, and you should revert to a fully scoped project. One of the areas that we also don't include within our 3-5-7 rollouts is escalations. Part of the reason we don't do this is because, in our experience and our opinion, escalations shouldn't really be implemented until the end of a project. Escalations are generally working off tables and views and data, and those tables and views and data are not necessarily finalized until right at the end of the project, and even sometimes after the customer's gone live for a couple of weeks or a month or two, and they start to tweak and change the system. So we would recommend that the escalations are not actually implemented as part of a very simple, quick, out-of-the-box system. So if we look at the breakdown of the 3 days in the first core 3 days of our 357 plan, this roughly sits in a 1-day installation and base config day. This is where we install the CRM software, we configure up their users, we might configure up some of the other general settings within the system area, maybe things like their email server for sending emails, that kind of stuff on the basic configuration. We also have 1 day for field and document configuration. So this is for the field captions, the drop-down lists, and the quote and order templates. Obviously, as I mentioned, the quote and order templates are very simple because they're generally logo changes given to the customer to do. And then 1 day's training. And now, interestingly, in this current pandemic space, online training has actually become quite prevalent, and we're running more and more courses personally on training people on how to use various aspects of Sage CRM. And if either on site or via online, it's around 1 day to train a brand new user or set of users up with the various different elements, giving them enough time to have some breaks and learn about the various different bits they need to do. So we generally build that into the first 3 days. At this point, that might actually be the end of the project because that's all the customer requires to be able to use CRM for things like communications, for companies, and maybe for quotes and orders and opportunities. And we have actually implemented many small Sage CRM implementations where this has actually been the end of phase 1, and the customer has used the project for many months until they decide at that point to start adding extra features and functionality. So for us, the most simple way that we've actually been able to deliver Sage CRM projects in the shortest amount of time is very basic 3-day implementations where we do the install and the configuration and the training within those core 3 days. However, the customer may actually want to add some more functionality on. So one of the key other features of Sage CRM that the customer might want to add in is marketing. This additional 2 days of the 357 plan, or 2 days of those, could be used for the marketing section. It's just worth noting at this point that the customer could choose to implement just sales for 3 days, or sales and marketing, or sales and cases for 5 days, and then all 3 for the full 7 days, hence the 357 method. Generally, marketing functionality within Sage CRM consists of groups and campaigns, and these areas are not generally heavily developed by the partner. You can add some fields, but not generally a heavily developed area as part of their implementation. An additional area of functionality, though, that might be added is MailChimp. We would normally recommend to a customer that if they don't currently perform any kind of email marketing or already use MailChimp, the MailChimp integration should be configured. But obviously, if they're already using their own third-party email marketing, they may want to use that and just use groups to export. But because of this fact that it's not heavily configured and it's mainly around groups, campaigns, and MailChimp, the majority of the 2 days that we tend to consume for the marketing area of 357 is spent around training them on how to create groups, training people on how to use and set up and use the campaigns area of Sage CRM, and also training around MailChimp. We generally suggest to the partners that we train up and other people who use this plan that Sage CRM consultants should at least have a basic understanding of MailChimp and how to create, design, and send emails via the platform, as well as how to process and use the return data that comes back to MailChimp into other campaigns, etc. There is another summit session on MailChimp and Mandrill. So if you're interested in finding out more about how the CRM system can use the functionality of both the MailChimp, click-through email marketing, and transactional email via Mandrill, it's worth checking out that session later on today, this morning, which will be worth checking out. So finally, the additional final 2 days of the 357 plan is to implement a basic case management system. We tend to find that cases are the last area of Sage CRM that tends to be implemented for customers, but this is in part because it's also one of the most complex. This is due to customers, we feel, generally having different issue resolution processes and different fields to the ones that come out of the box. And it's quite rare for a company to have the ability to use the standard out-of-the-box software company fields and revisions and founding numbers and stuff that come out of the box with Sage CRM. So predominantly, this is one of the key areas that gets implemented. So in general, this is one of the areas where we may implement workflowing as well. So I mentioned at the start that we would generally not implement workflowing for sales, but we quite often do run workflowing for cases. Obviously, it's very predominant within a case management system. And I know I said no workflow, but invariably cases do go through some kind of process, and as such, workflowing is generally required. But we would, as part of 357, specifically state that the workflow process shouldn't really go over 6 to 7 very basic stages, and we would normally guide the customer through their process to either streamline that process, or if it does involve a very large, complicated workflow process, we would generally deliver the cases, the sales and marketing sections of 357, and then put cases into a fully scoped project. It wouldn't, unless it's simple case management, go into the 357 plan. However, we find that one of the benefits of actually deploying cases for 357 is that it shows the customer on workflow for cases, shows the customer what the product can actually do in some of its more advanced, useful features. And that generally leads to phase 2 workflow and escalation type design management going forwards in phase 2. So generally, if we look at the split of time, we would generally, because the amount of work around workflow and field customization, again, coming back to the field captions, the drop-down list, and a limited amount of additional fields, we generally split our 2 days of 357 into about 1.5 days for the field and workflow design, and then around a half-day training, because at that point they're already aware of how Sage CRM can function, how you find records, how you add records, that kind of stuff. The training is normally a bit shorter on that. So that's all great. You know, it's a methodology for simplification, only amending certain parts of the system, stripping the system down as much as possible. But actually, how do we implement this in the real world? Well, predominantly, we use 3 main tools to help us and the customer understand the requirements and identify any potential issues that may occur as early on in the project as possible. The majority of these issues are normally found towards the back end of a project where they're the hardest to resolve. So one of the first things that we do, even in pre-sales, is send the customer a hardware and software audit document that's either filled out by themselves or their external IT. This covers things on the document, such as the server details, existing software, such as client operating systems, email server, and if they have their own SQL server. After all, I think we've all probably had customers that say, oh yeah, I've got a server, and then when it comes to the actual install, it's a Windows XP machine or something in the corner of the room that they call the server. So it's good to try and find those things out at the start of the project. Additionally, we also cover off whether they have any antivirus software, as this can obviously sometimes affect the software, either on install or on general running. And also things like Microsoft Office versions, obviously due to compatibility of plugins, and also whether they have existing remote access details. From our perspective, this is a really quick exercise performed by the customer in the majority that will help us decide a few things. Does the customer need a new server or cloud hosting? Is there any compatibility issues? And how can we connect to their network to install and configure? A second document that we send to the customer is the Sage CRM field configuration template. This document is designed to allow the customer to specify field caption changes, drop-down values where applicable on drop-down fields, and fields that they do not require. So I mentioned when we looked at the sales and support elements that we do minor drop-down of fields, and this is where we actually get that information out of the customer. So this includes front page instructions and various tabs at each of the core entities previously mentioned. including things like leads, companies, shown here, person and opportunity. So you can see here, for example, we'll have a table of company, and we have a list of the default fields within the company table, the type of field, the existing caption, and then the existing drop-down value, if it's a drop-down, and a remove column. And we can actually, at this point, guide the customer through putting in new caption changes, new drop-down changes, and if they want that field removed from the system. We also, within the document, show them an example of each one of these screens in the development area. So this is just showing a company screen within the company section. But we also, and we also, depending on if you have the cases section, add cases onto the 3.5 implementation as well. Furthermore, we also have additional tabs within the documentation that allow the customers to specify up to 10 new fields that they want creating. So if you remember, we said that we generally only allow customer user to add a very limited amount. Obviously, you do more, but this is what we do within our documentation. And this allows them to specify 10 new fields that they want. They can specify the table, such as company, person, opportunity, the field type that they want, a caption, and if applicable, a set of drop-down values against the drop-down field. We limit this to 10 fields to make the customer think about the fields they're asking for and whether they can reuse existing fields instead. When the customer has added cases, we also add an additional 10 fields for cases, as this is one of the key areas most customized to match customer requirements. We have a separate tab for cases that allow you to show the 10 on there. We also have a tab for them to add their required user details and also any third-party connection details that we may need to configure on the system. However, quite often this is confusing for the customer who haven't been involved in this kind of software implementation before. And so where required, we spend up to an hour on a remote session guiding the main user who will be filling out the spreadsheet, how to use it, and what various details on the spreadsheet are meant for. So we now know, based on the software document and hardware software and this field configuration, what the minor modifications are required and any issues that we may come up with regards to hardware or software. And we now effectively have enough to start installing and customizing their Sage CRM system. These details can be passed on to any Sage CRM consultant to then start performing that implementation. And at this point, as a business, as part of the project, we've actually only consumed no more than a few hours of guiding the customer through the various bits of documentation. Something else that we also do is we provide, we have a Cleardown component that we've written. So finally, once we're ready to actually start configuring, we take some of the time out of the configuration by turning on and off various bits of functionality that they don't actually want, so to save time when deploying via the 357 method. And we've created a Sage CRM Cleardown component that allows you to select what areas of the system you do or don't want the customer to use based on what areas of the 357 method they have decided to go ahead with. As an example, if the customer wants to use marketing but not cases, you would just tick the use marketing checkbox. This would turn off the cases and workflows in the various areas of the system. And if you wanted to use marketing and cases, you would obviously then tick the marketing and cases tabs and maybe still not tick workflow and just turn case workflow on manually. This doesn't do anything intrusive. It sets search SQL against the various tabs, etc., to turn them off. And just sets the user workflow values in the system config to no for the various areas. And the final box that we have is the clean UI box. So this is something we added to tidy up the user interface. For us, it got quite frustrated when we had to keep swapping the first name, last name around on every screen. So this just does things like that. It tidies up the last name, first name into first name, last name, and hides various tabs that people wouldn't use as part of 357, such as the self-service tabs. So that's basically it, the 357 method that we use, and something that we've been using for the past few years. So just to summarize some of the key points on 357, we generally only specify field captions and drop-down changes with minimal new fields that should be created. No workflows or escalations should be built, except potentially a simple case workflow if required. We generally use the hardware software audit document and the scoping spreadsheet. This is only for very basic systems to get customers up and running with simple CRM solutions as quickly as possible. And this lends itself to a land and expand approach to reduce risk and cost both to the customer and the partner. And obviously, if the project can't fit within these guidelines, it must be fully scoped to reduce the risk for everyone. So I'll leave that up on the screen now. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm just checking the questions window. If anyone's got any questions for the next couple of minutes, if you wanted to ask any questions in the questions window, we'll finish in about the next 5 minutes or so. Okay, so we've got a few questions coming in. The first one is, what about the upload of companies and contacts? A good point. We generally we have a list of default import spreadsheets, and we would give them to the customer and get them to actually populate those import spreadsheets themselves. But they are structured in a way that will allow quick and easy importing into the Sage CRM system. Can you send me the slide deck? Absolutely. And also the documents, the hardware software audit, the field template, and the CRM component should now actually be available within the resources tab within the Summit website. And I'll also look at uploading the import templates as well. So that should be fine. Hello, if you use the components to use workflow initially, can you use a component in the future to switch on cases? Absolutely. You can switch on cases using the component. The one thing to note is that if you don't tick, if they are using marketing, for example, and you don't tick use marketing, it will then turn marketing off. So you need to make sure that the bits that you want to be working are on there, but yes, that will work for that. Do you find clients are opening to purchase further days using this method? Absolutely. In our experience, customers that have bought 5 users 5 days within the first 6 to 12 months generally turn into 20 user 20-day sites as they start to bring in things like cases, etc. You know, our expansion rate on the amount of users is quite large as they start to use the system more and more. So absolutely, we tend to find that they do grow very rapidly. Is your component to reduce functions a tool for everyone? Yes, we actually give this away free of charge, as mentioned earlier, to enable as many partners as they like to use this method. It's not something we keep secret, and you should be able to download the component now. Obviously, play around with it, maybe put it onto a test system and just see how it works. And you can obviously tweak the various bits within that component install if you wanted to change or take bits out that it did. All of that kind of stuff on the component and the document are generally open source, so we're not too worried about that. Let's see if we've got any more. Often small adjustments are asked for, and this can add hours. How do we avoid this? So this is very much why we use the document. We get the customers to predominantly agree that they are that the fields that they specify on the screen are the ones that they want. Quite often, some of these areas actually free up some time. So maybe the marketing doesn't take 2 days; it takes a day, and they might have purchased marketing. So you can start to bank a few bits of hours here and there. But we would then generally ask for sort of a small change document, maybe another spreadsheet or the same spreadsheet refilled out with the various changes that the customer predominantly wants. But it needs to be documented within a spreadsheet or a document. Otherwise, you end up with this support. Someone phones up support and asks, "Can I add a new field here? Can I add a new field there, etc." So it needs to be fairly tightly managed. But the idea is to get the system in as out of the box as possible. With minor field and drop down changes, and then let the customer start to specify back to you what they want. So it's very hard to avoid someone randomly picking up a phone and asking, but it needs to be sort of controlled. And part of that, if I'm honest, comes from the sales engagement as well. So Specifically, the salesperson needs to be selling in the way that can be implemented via the 3-5-7 plan. And you see this a lot from other CRM systems, such as Salesforce, for example. You can go online and buy Salesforce out of the box, and it just does what it does. But you can start to tweak and change it as you see fit. Invariably, when people are selling Sage CRM, because of all the great things it can do, people end up telling the customer all of the great things that it can do. And then the customer's expectations, probably quite rightly as part of the sales engagement, are that it can do all of this really fancy stuff. If you then try and pigeonhole that into a 3-day implementation, because they think we can sell it under 3 days, that's when you start to get issues around customer expectations not matching the project that's being delivered. So if the salespeople are trained or learn very quickly whether to implement a very basic out the box or whether it needs to be scoped, that can then help with any kind of minor small adjustments or scope creep. When do we introduce a configuration template to the client? As part of the latter stages of the sales engagement. So once we show them the product and they're generally happy with what it can do, we would start to at least show them, like I have done here, the sort of thing that we would present to them if they decide to go ahead with the project, so that they're aware prior to actually purchasing the software what the stages are involved, what we're expecting from them, and what we're going to get back. You can access all customer yeah, so that's more of a Sage 300 integration into CRM question. I'm assuming that's related around the additional fields, etc., that get installed. So this is by default from a standard or light touch integration, such as the Sage 50 or Sage 200 integration. But obviously, once you've got that integration loaded with the fields, etc., on the screen, you can start to amend that in the same way. You just need to make sure that the field template document is modified for you to actually have these Sage 300 fields that are available. So yes, pre-sale, I as part of the sales process. So obviously, when you're talking to the customer and you've demoed the software, before they actually place an order, we would explain to them the process that they're going to go through, so that everyone is fully aware from the moment they sign an order what's expected of the partner, what's expected of the customer, what's going to be delivered by the partner, and what needs to be delivered by the customer. Because as I mentioned at the start, a lot of the success of the project isn't necessarily down to the partner or the customer. It's very much down to both people knowing exactly what they're going to be demonstrating. Okay, so that's all the questions run through. Slightly over time, but thanks so much for your time. You'll notice that the documents I mentioned are on the resources tab. The video, etc., is going to be put onto YouTube in the next day or so. So you'll be able to see all of these sessions over the next couple of days. But thanks very much for attending. I hope you found some of this useful. We and other partners have implemented probably 20, 30, 40 systems in this way. You need to tweak it for each customer slightly, but it does allow you to at least create some kind of standardized structure to allow you to deliver. So I hope you've all found this session useful. Obviously, there's various sessions running throughout the day, and if you have any questions, post these up on the social lounge boards. And if you have anything to say on Twitter, hopefully positive, please use the Sage CRM Summit 2020 hashtag. Thanks everyone for your time.